Great. All right, so again, thank you for joining us on September 12th for the NEMSIS V3 implementation call. This is our first call since we held our very successful V3 meeting in Deer Valley up in the Park City area in August. That was well attended and we received a lot of good information, and this V3 implementation call will begin to work on many of the issues that we had great discussion about during that meeting. We have a number of items to go through today. I'll just make mention that we will be doing another SurveyMonkey about halfway through this call, and you can see the URL to access that SurveyMonkey in blue about halfway down the page. There was a work group session during our meeting in Deer Valley that looked at some late-breaking revision requests. And so these are a number of requests that came in while we were actually going through the process of reviewing those that came in during the actual call for revision requests. There was a number that came in. We wanted to make sure that for many of those we had a chance to review those quickly to see if we could actually implement them in this round of the 3.5 revision process. So if you would just take note of that, and if you could prepare your phones or prepare your computer to be able to take that survey, that would be great. I'm just going to go with the beginning of the agenda, so I'm going to go ahead and start with Monet. She's going to provide an indication of where we have listed the information that resulted from the great discussions I held in the workgroup sessions. So Monet, I'm going to pass over the presenter role to you. All right, Monet, you may be on mute.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
can you hear
we
me,
can.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. Again, sincere appreciation for everyone who was able to attend the meeting, and for those of you who are not. We have provided the summary information on the page. I'm actually going to go back to the home page really quickly because I did remove the tab for the annual meeting from the hero slider, but you can access the information by scrolling down to the software vendor news and click on the annual meeting information, and here are the work group. The pre-materials are still here, and then we have them broken down by round one breakout sessions. And so, for instance, if you were part of the Schematron business rule group, or if you were not and you want to get an idea of what the questions were and the discussion, you can click here. I've changed this to question and responses. And so for this first tab, what we'll see here is that the topic is in the black text, and I'll just highlight, increase the size for that briefly. And then the actual question is here in red, and then the response from the participants is indicated here in blue. And so that's just an example of what these documents look like on this page. We'll get out of that. And so we have each document for each breakout session, the responses for the work group, the questions and responses here indicated on this entire page. And so if you have any questions, please feel free to contact Clay or Lisa for additional questions. Thanks, Clay. I'll send the presentation back to you.
Okay, thank you, Monet. Appreciate that very much. And so, yeah, if you participated in any of the work groups, if you were able to join us and participate in the work groups, feel free to review the work that you participated in. If there's anything that was lost in the conversation, or perhaps we didn't get a chance or did not kind of include your thoughts in that summary of the responses during the work group, feel free to just email us and we'll add your thoughts to the documents. There were 8 work group sessions, and all the our respondents provided great information to us that really will guide these implementation calls, I think, for several months into the future. And even today, we'll talk about some of the results as we move down through the agenda. All right, one of the important topics that was covered during that meeting in Deer Valley was the introduction of a vendor version of the data submission dashboard. We held a session on the second day talking about what our ideas were for this dashboard. We've been able to refine that work, and we're ready to present it to this group so that you can get a feel for that dashboard. It is posted, and so if you want to follow along with Kevin as he presents that work, feel free to go to the NEMSIS website and under vendor. If you're a vendor, feel free to access that dashboard. So I'm going to pass the presenter role to you, Kevin. There you go.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. As Clay mentioned, we introduced a modification to a dashboard at the annual meeting, but not everyone was there. So I want to walk through some of the new aspects of both what we had available prior, but what we added on to it. Before I do that, I want to point out two particular things that might be very helpful. These are all of our dashboards are secured, so they require a login. And if you already have a login but perhaps forgot what your password is, you can come down to the bottom of our website and click on this Forgot Password link, and that will walk you through a self-service password reset process that's really the same as you would get on any commercial website these days. For the reports ourselves, if you go to the top of our website in our navigation and the View Reports link up there, you can see that we have multiple categories of reports. For us today, we're going to be looking at one that's a software vendor report. So this is a report that is only for people who work for a vendor that has passed compliance. Regardless of which level of compliance, so whether you're field level or state level, these are your reports. We do have multiple reports here. The one that we're going to go through today is just this data submission dashboard. But even before I go through that, I want to make sure that for those of you who don't already have an account or are wondering if you have an account, maybe you got one and completely forgot that you got one, you can go right here and request an account. It's just a simple form that we have for you to fill out, and you can select your type of whether you're field vendor or state vendor. It's just so that we can gather the information necessary to create the account and allow us to verify that you are in fact someone who is authorized to access these reports. Now, I'm not going to show the actual interactive report here today. I'm going to show some PowerPoint screenshots to walk you through it. And that's because if I were to log in, I would be revealing information from multiple vendors. And, of course, that's not appropriate. And we take our security very seriously, which, again, is why we require everyone to have a named login so that we can make sure that you're only able to see the information that's most appropriate for you. So there are two different views or tabs associated with this dashboard. And I want to make sure everyone understands that when I use those two terms, view and tab, they're really interchangeable. One, the view term is an artifact of the tool that we use to produce these dashboards, which is a software product called Tableau. So just know if I ever say view or tab, they're really the same thing. We're going to start here on just on this first view here. This is something that we'd had available for quite a while. This is a breakdown of schematron warning messages that we at the NEMSIS TAC collect. So these are schematron warning messages that we collect when a patient care report is submitted to us and processed through our system. So these are national level only. These are not state level schematron warning messages. And there's a lot of information on this screen, and there's actually a whole second half to this. But the real core element here is that we're looking more than anything at the warning messages. We do have some summary information up here that just goes to the number of activations, which is the number of reports, a breakdown on number of violations, and some other information such as violations per activation, which is an important number. Really within each record, what's your average number of schematron warning messages, and so on down the line. Submission lag. Submission lag is something that I want to take a moment to explain. It is the difference between, in hours, the difference between the time the record was submitted to us at the NEMSIS TAC and the recorded unit back in service time that is part of the record. So it's the difference between those two times. Over here we have just a timeline, just a simple bar chart that shows submissions by calendar date. And by default, this report shows a 14-day window, just to kind of give you an idea. And this is a screenshot from a few weeks ago, so that's why it's a little, that's why it's still showing July. And the difference in colors here is just records with violations and records without violations. And the ones with are in orange, the ones without are in green. Down here, we just have this little breakdown of how that average violation rate breaks out by day of week and hour block to get a sense of when the probability of a violation occurring goes up. And you'll see kind of in this overall, it looks like Wednesday evening, maybe Tuesday, Thursday are really kind of those hot areas kind of overall, followed closely probably like Wednesday morning, Thursday morning. Then we have this violation rate broken down by zip code, and this because we're looking at kind of a nationwide view here, that's why we're seeing this. When you log in, what you're going to see is only information on records that at one time your software product had custody of. So if the record never passed through your software, was never created by your software, you don't get access to it. And you'll be able to vary, if you have multiple software packages produced by your company, you will be able to filter that up here. As long as if you have multiple versions, you'll be able to filter by version. You'll be able to filter by agency number as well. I know oftentimes we get a request for agency name. We don't have agency name in our system. We just have unique ID and number, and that's why we provide that. And then we just have the submission date range as well. I will note that in reference to the submission date range, that we refresh all of our dashboards once a week on Sundays, and we process submissions Monday through Friday. So when you come in and maybe you access this report on a Monday morning, what you're going to see is information that's current as of the prior Friday, just to kind of give you a sense of the lag there. Now the second view I've got up here is just again a further breakdown of that average warning rate by different ways to segment the information, by element within the standard, by EMS agency, by patterns within schematron, and then by software package version as well. So again, if you have multiple versions, you can see if maybe one version is generating a higher average rate of warnings than the other version. And then there's one more bit of detail down here, and that is the warning messages themselves and the average rate at which they're occurring. To give you an idea in plain English, what is actually occurring in terms of the violations, right? For example, this top one here is just type of destination hospital, and it's not, but there's a hospital capability. So if you choose it, if the paramedic or the first responder chooses type of destination hospital, they also need to choose, they also should be choosing that hospital's capability level. Now we're here into something that's brand new, and this is something we introduced at the annual meeting, and this is a ranking. So this is just a caterpillar chart that shows that average warning rate per day and ranked across vendors. This line here is a threshold. It's really a KPI or key performance indicator of where we would like to see vendors be below, which is no more than one schematron warning message per record per day, right? So your daily, we'd like to see a daily average of 1. Now you'll notice that there's only one label here, although there's clearly multiple vendors represented here, and that's by design. When you log in, you will only see your bar labeled with your name, but you will see your relative ranking in the entire universe of, again, compliant vendors. You'll see your distribution. For example, this software vendor, their average is sitting at 1.3, but they have a really wide distribution in terms of their average rates. And each of these little boxes is actually a day, so to kind of give you an idea of how that sits. But like this, which is ABC software in this case, they're sitting at 0.9, so they're just below that threshold, but they give that a really nice tight band in terms of the rate at which they're not seeing a lot of variation. And then finally, this second visualization is brand new as well, and this is a trend line. And in this case, this is going to be a 6-month trend rather than a 14-day. And this is just looking at, again, it's that average rate all over again that we've been talking about this entire time, just trended by day over time. And that's the blue line here. The red line is the 7-day moving average of that rate. So what that means is whatever the rate is for today, the 7-day moving average is the average of the 7 days prior to today. So it just helps you smooth out and kind of get an idea of what is really the longer term trend here. And then finally, we have this dotted line, which is the linear best fit, which is the straight line that is closest to all the points.
Hey, this is Krista. I'm wondering if I'm
that fits the nicest in there. Well, that was kind of a nickel tour, but I think that's really all we have. Clay, is there anything that you wanted to add on this?
Yeah, I've got a quick comment. Can you go back to the comparison? And
yes,
I certainly am happy to open it up to questions too. Would love to have opinions on this. But this.
Hi, John. This is Krista. We talked yesterday about the bottle of wine for my mother.
Hey, Krista. Could you put your phone on mute?
I'm doing fine, Howard.
Okay.
Hey, you don't know that for sure, though. No, I'm kidding.
So I apologize. Bridget, can you indicate who that is on the line? Okay, so
it was Krista. I got her muted.
Okay. Kind of the underlying assumption in this comparison chart would be easy to say, hey, well, it's not the software that's really making these having these warnings show up. It's the conscientiousness of the providers that's really leading to these warnings showing up in records that end up in the national repository, and that is certainly true. But I think what the point we're trying to make here is that those lazy versus conscientious providers who are filling out reports probably distribute kind of randomly across all the software products. I can't believe that this product way over here on the right that has the most errors per record, that they only sold their product to people that really don't care about record keeping. That's probably not true, right? Probably what is showing here is there's a difference in the presentation of warning messages. There's a difference in how the elements are presented to them during a call. And so really, hopefully, this is a valuable tool for vendors to take a look at this and say, oh, okay, how looks like we're throwing a lot of errors on this day when we release this version, for example, and what can we do to tighten that up? And, of course, we'd love to have all the vendors try to work themselves down that list from right to left. And then the other thing I think that's valuable, of course, is not only the ranking, but as Kevin mentioned, is important, the consistency of the performance of your software, right? So do you really have a tight band across these 14 days, or do you really have a wide spread where maybe there was a difference in versioning, or maybe type of call doesn't flow as well in your product compared to others? We're hoping that this will give you some insight as to how you may be able to look at your product to improve its performance in regards to data accuracy. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention, Kevin, I didn't hear you talk a little bit about this Tuesday that we're going to begin kind of pushing out a notification to vendors about kind of just a partial of this report so they can easily access it. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Right. Yes. Thank you. Yes. Starting Tuesday, for whoever already has an account with us, you will be receiving this, and this every Tuesday morning in your email as an image embedded in an email. And if you click on that image, you'll be taken directly to the report, to the dashboard itself. So again, you'll be receiving only the information you're authorized to receive in your email. We have everyone's account associated with a company name, so we know who you are and who employs you, and we'll be able to do that. But yes, starting Tuesday morning, you will be receiving again this, and this.
All right, and the purpose here is just to help facilitate the use of this report. I think it can be incredibly valuable. Can you go back to the first view that they will see? Even if you can just do a quick look at the number of records per day that was submitted to us without any warnings at all, those in green compared to those in orange. I mean, if you're watching that change from Tuesday to Tuesday, more green, great. Your product is becoming cleaner, and the data is certainly cleaner. If you see it creeping up and becoming more orange, hopefully this will just help us as an industry to try to improve our data quality as much as possible. Any questions for Kevin regarding this dashboard?
Hey, Clay, this is Dan.
Hey, Dan.
Okay, so maybe not necessarily about the tool, but we have been digging through this report a little bit since the conference, and a pretty big majority of schematron warnings coming from various agencies using our product are around the hospital capability warning.
Yeah.
When we've reached out to some of those agencies, because in our software they have the power to control these warnings if they show up or not, almost 100% of the time they have no desire in telling their providers to fill this in. And so I was just wondering if you guys are going to put a whole bunch of emphasis towards reducing schematron warnings, is there some guidance or verbiage that you guys have made already that we could pass on that says why it's important to fill in something like hospital capability on every transport?
Yeah, Dan, that's a great question, and thanks for bringing that up. I think so two answers to your question. I think as part of our review, moving to 3.5, we want to be able to review the schematron errors or the schematron messages and business rules that are present in the national file, and ensure that we kind of have the collection of those that are most relevant and most accurate, right? So clearly, because they are warnings, there's a possibility, right, that in rare circumstances you could have a situation where you're going to throw a schematron warning when it's valid, or there's also these issues that just may not be important on every call, and you bring up a perfect example, Dan. So we need to decide as an industry whether or not, for example, that specific warning is something that we want to continue to track. The second answer to your question is also incredibly valuable and was brought up at the meeting, is that we need to do a much better job at trying to communicate to our providers the value of these business rules and how they probably should guide their behavior. But then, of course, they have to be important business rules. And so I think trying to tighten up the rules that are in the national set using kind of both of these ideas over the next 6 or 7 months hopefully will help with that. Yeah, you're right. If you go, Kevin, can you go down to the third slide just in this set? I think even one more. Yeah. So there you can see that number one warning is exactly what you're talking about, where hospital capability hasn't been recorded. So it's clearly the most common error or common warning that is triggered in the data set. So we need to take a look at these and see if these are ones that we want to continue to include. So thanks, Dan. That was a great question.
Yeah, and maybe that's just to follow up. I would imagine when the data dictionary was first created, fields marked as national were done so because the vision was they would be used in a report or a study or something. And so it'd be interesting to see if you could find examples where this is being used, and if nobody's ever used it for a report or a study, maybe you're right. It's not worth demanding everybody collect it. So, yep, good thought.
Well, that one is used for the core measures, that particular one for the transport to a trauma center.
I guess that's talking more general, but you're right, David. Every element probably has a story.
Yeah, and that could be a great kind of improvement on this rule, for example, right? That really this rule could only apply if there was a time-sensitive condition that was involved in the treatment of that patient, right? So maybe that needs to be cleaned up better. Maybe it needs to be dropped. Maybe it needs to be revised. We really need to start that work now that we have some good data coming in based on version 3. So other questions related to this report? Yeah, so Dan, thank you for looking into this. This has been, that's great. That's very purpose, right? And you've caught some low-hanging fruit for us to address. Please, any of you vendors, if you are going through this report and find other issues that can be reported to us where we can try to improve the accuracy of the data and the pertinence of these reports, we'd love to continue to refine this and make sure that these are valuable tools for you. All right, any other questions? Okay, Kevin, I'm going to request viewing again, if I could. All right, great. All right, fantastic. We'll move on to item 3 here in our list. Just wanted to bring people up to speed in regards to progress we've made since we held the Deer Valley meeting. We have 2 working groups that are meeting on a very regular basis. There's a work group that's working to further refine the recommendations that were made during the meeting to E-Disposition 12. They have met twice. Once, one of those calls was yesterday, and they made some great progress. And so that group is moving forward with great progress, and hopefully we'll have a report from that working group soon. We also have a CARES NEMSIS harmonization work group that's underway, and they'll be holding their third meeting, basically the second work group meeting this Friday, and so they're making some progress as well. So that's really great news. Then the other thing that we want to cover today is for you, as we did last year, have the ability to vote on some late-breaking revision requests that came in to the NEMSIS TAC while we were actually going through the larger review process last year. So if you would bring up SurveyMonkey at this point, I'll bring up the PowerPoint presentation, and we can work through this. Is there anyone that's having trouble accessing the survey? Okay. All right, fantastic. Well, I will work down through these comments. I'm going to try to just keep it not on the presentation mode because I'd like to be able to move back and forth across the data dictionary if we need to do that. One quick comment about these late-breaking revisions. So there was a group of 8 members who participated in this work group. We did the same survey. You'll find those survey results on the bottom of each of these slides to possibly give you some indication of what this group thought about each of the revisions. I will comment that we had a chance to meet with NHTSA after we went through this session, and they reviewed their revision requests, and their comment to us was that this was great, that we're dealing with these things that were brought up a little bit later in the process, but they have some hesitancy towards big changes that would really kind of be a major revision to the NEMSIS standard, having those being introduced so late in the process. So as we walk down through this, I'll just give you an idea of where NHTSA felt like there was some concern. So just so that you can kind of be thinking about that as you vote. All right, so let's move through. So next slide. Your voting will be as we did all last year. If you vote Agile, you feel like we have the information necessary to resolve the request and you'd like it to move forward under the revision for 3.5.0. Defer means that we could again consider this in a future revision, and kind of indicating that the revision has merit, but it's probably too complex, too extensive, or we still have missing information to really include it in the revision that will happen this next kind of governmental fiscal year. And decline basically indicates that that revision request probably shouldn't move forward. All right, so any questions about the 3 groups? Okay, let's move into the revision request. So this first one is a kind of a request that was generated by Kevin Putnam and was discussed on the DMC listserv last month. The current definition associated with E times 09, which is the time the unit left the scene, the date time, the current definition has the word with a patient in that definition. So you can see the current and the proposed change to the definition. The proposed definition is the same, except we are removing the words with a patient. Any questions about this request? Okay. Move on to item number 2. We have about 10 revision requests, so this shouldn't take too long. We should be able to move through this quickly. All right, the next request for a revision was made by Chip Cooper. He's basically suggesting that we deprecate the D contact section, so out of the demographic section. There are a number of elements in this section that might fit better or make a little more sense to be moved into different parts of the demographic data set that are already present. So D-Contact 05 through D-Contact 12 could be moved to D-Agency. Let's see if I can just bring this up real quick so you can just take a quick look at the data dictionary in regards to the D-Contact section. So let me bring this over. So here's the D-Contact section. So D5 through D12 is really the address of the agency, and that could be moved to D-Agency. D-Contact 01, which is the agency contact type, could be moved to D-Personnel, and then we could actually deprecate D-Contact 02 through 04 because that information is slightly repetitive in the standard, and could be moved to the medical director, and the medical directors group, which sits right down here, could be moved to D personnel. So feel free to vote on that. I'll show you maybe. So here's kind of an example of visually how the D contact section would be moved and what would change. So feel free to vote on deprecating the D contact section. This was an item that NHTSA felt like would be a large revision to consider with the short time we have to complete the revision. All right, the next one, late breaker number 3, is a revision to the E-airway section. This is to add to E-airway 04, which is airway device placement confirm method, to add the value chest rise. This was a request made by Chip, and he indicates that this is a standard confirmation method that's used by EMS to confirm the placement of an airway device. Okay, we'll move on to late breaker number 4. This is again a change to the E-airway section. So here is the idea of moving the E-airway section to the E-procedure section. So again, this has been an area of a little bit of concern because the E-airway section clearly has values and elements within it that define a procedure. There are things that are a little bit different in the E-airway section as well, though, and so the idea is, could we modify the E-procedure section to support specific airway and also cardiac arrest values that really include procedures. So here's the E-airway section. So clearly we do indicate that a procedure is done. That could be included in E-procedures. We indicate whether there was any complications that were encountered, and of course the E-procedure section has an element that indicates whether there was a complication associated with the procedure. The values here are a little bit different. There's clearly other elements associated with airway that aren't in the E-procedures group, so we'd have to decide how we wanted to change E-procedures to support the inclusion of the procedure so that our providers aren't kind of double entering the data. We'd also have to ensure that we can still collect the information that's important to confirming an airway and other kind of components of E-airway. So if you go ahead and vote on late breaker number 4, this was another one that NHTSA felt like would be a little complicated to complete. All right, late breaker number 5 was the addition of what has been called a gateway element. So this would be a new element that would be added to the NEMSIS standard. and we would require that it be placed pretty early in the presentation of a software product. And its purpose is really to identify high priority activations that states may be interested in looking at, or that may trigger parts of the NEMSIS standard to show, present themselves to the provider, kind of ensuring that we have a standard way of kind of indicating that, yeah, this is a severe trauma, STEMI stroke, cardiac arrest, possible opioid overdose, that would let excuse me, the state and investigator and researchers know that, and our providers, that there are specific variables that need to be collected for each of these kind of high priority medical conditions. There was also the idea that we could just simply promote E-other-O2 to national. E-other-O2, I'll show you that just real quickly. So E-other-O2, some systems are using this element to provide this kind of a gateway element where it indicates whether the patient has any of these criteria that might enter them into a special category, either a registry or some other category that a state or EMS agency might feel is important. So that's the idea behind this one, to provide some kind of modification that allows the provider to know immediately that this is a high priority medical condition, and there'll be special information that will be collected related to it. Okay, I'll move on to late breaker 6. So this is a broken link that was found by David Newton, and also a slight federal revision to the standard that identifies occupations in this country. So David sent this to us. We would correct the link in the comment, and then also we would be changing the explanation associated with this classification of occupations. It used to read education, training, and library occupations. The new version of the document takes out the word training, and so we would make this change to the NEMSIS standard. All right, so vote on late breaker 6. Late breaker 7 is to add value to e-disposition 23, hospital capability of labor and delivery. One of the values of doing this is that e-disposition 24, which I'll show just real quickly here. Sorry. Which is whether or not there was a pre-arrival alert. We have in here obstetrics, but in e-disposition 23, there's nowhere to indicate that hospital capability has labor and delivery capabilities. So we'd be adding this value to e-disposition 23. All right, so late breaker 8 is a change to the definition associated with eVitals 33. This is a revised trauma score. There is 2 possible ways to present a revised trauma score. One is called a weighted value, and one is an unweighted value. We've been asked to just add the term unweighted to the definition for revised trauma score, because a numerical pattern that's associated with this element best fits an unweighted value rather than a weighted value. And I think that the initial inclusion of this element was to include the unweighted value of a revised trauma score. All right, let's move on to late breaker 9. This is a simple change as well. There is, for some reason, some extra language in some of the XSD, specifically associated with D Agency 16 and D Agency 17. We have this term definition in the XSD. It's not supposed to be there, so we would be removing that. This was a clarification requested by Josh. Late breaker 10, you'll find that there are 2 questions on your survey related to this, and there are 2 questions in this request. It was suggested by David Saylor. If we go to E other, and I go down to 15, you'll see that we do have two representations of refused to sign. So we have refused here, right here, and then we also have refused right here. So the idea is to remove the term refused here, and so we don't have that duplication. That is your first response in your survey to this request for E other 15. Then David also suggested that maybe there are some other reasons we should add to not signed. So the idea here is if folks vote that we probably need to add some of these to the current list of not signed, then we will review this list. And so if you vote yes on this, it doesn't mean that we're going to be adding all these. It's that we need to review this again, and we'll work with the DMC and this group to decide what needs to be added to the current list of E other 15. And that is your second request associated with E other 15. Okay, just two left. All right, E-Procedures 03, this was actually a miscommunication, so just go ahead and decline late breaker 11. I wanted to show it to you because we showed it to the work group up in Deer Valley and wanted to show that you saw exactly the same thing. We thought that there was, with new procedure codes coming out of SNOMED, they now include much more numeric values, and so we were concerned that EX Integer couldn't handle this, but this has been resolved, and so if you would just indicate this as declined, that would be great. All right, the last late breaker was for the E other section, specifically dealing with occupational injuries, that we could add an element that indicates the cause of injury. So if we go to the E other section here, so it would be in this crew member group. You can indicate here, of course, that there was a suspected kind of exposure, injury, or death to our EMS professionals, and what type of injury exposure that is, but we don't have a way of identifying the cause of the injury. And so this would be adding an element to this section that would include probably the same type of a pattern in ICD-10 to identify the cause of the injury. This was suggested by Anne. This was another one that NHTSA felt like perhaps was a bit of a late breaker for the addition of injury, but please vote your preference.
Hey, Clay.
Yes.
I assume that if we vote yes, the field will be called something different than cause of injury, which already exists. Okay.
Yeah. Good point, Dan. Thank you. Yeah, good point.
I was going to bring up about the very first one.
Let me go back up there. Here?
Yep. The definition change wouldn't change too much with how things are done in the field right now. There's a lot of concern about making any changes, and that's kind of why it's angled toward the defer and the decline choices. But we talked about it a little more, and I think most software products don't prevent you from putting a left scene time in, even if you didn't have a patient. It's kind of a nice bookmark for the provider, or not bookend, I mean, where it's you got the scene and you left scene. It's those symmetrical times, and then I think it's very often documented that way, and also any rules that are written around looking at the left scene time, they usually only look at it if they know there's been a patient, so it's not really it's not used as a trigger in that way. So I think making this change would bring it in line with how it's used in the field more often than the actual definition.
Yeah, David, great point. I'll also just point out in the E times O section, if you, for example, are just a first responder and you're really not going to ever leave with a patient, there are other values down through E times 13 through E times 16 where the standard was built where if you were, for example, a first responder who won't be transporting, that you would utilize these values at the end of the E times section to close out a call. So David presents a really good case, and then you can also see here why the standard included with a patient for leave scene. So that could be specific to the calculation of key response times when there's a patient involved. So, okay, great. Any other questions related to the review of the late breakers? Okay, great. Thank you very much for your participation. That's incredibly helpful to us. We now, also up at the meeting, we talked about providing a mechanism whereby stakeholders are going to be able to track the progress towards moving these revisions into V 3.5.0, being able to see exactly what will be changed. And Lisa is going to show us the documentation that we're going to be providing for you to be able to track those things. There you go, Lisa.
Hey, thanks, Clay. Can everyone hear me and see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. All right, so regarding the 350 work, we've created a solution where everyone can follow development progress on all approved changes. The tool we're using is JIRA, and we've created a specific project within JIRA called NEMSIS Public, and I'll show you how to get there. So from the main NEMSIS.org webpage, you'll scroll down to revision requests. You'll click more.
So Lisa, we're not seeing your screen where you're making those movements. We're seeing a Word document.
This document. Oh, sorry. You're seeing my notes. Okay. I will move this here. Thank you, Clay.
Yep, you're welcome.
Let me reboot. Okay, so we're on the NEMSIS webpage. We'll scroll down to the revision request and click more. Let me get this out of the way. And you'll scroll down toward the bottom of this page, and here's the link. So the NEMSIS Public JIRA project, where we'll track development and implementation activities. You'll click here. And this is the view that you'll land in. So this is open to the public. It's read-only for the public, and the only folks that will be able to edit any of these items are the developers on the NEMSIS staff. So we can review, so let's look at, this is a list of about 28 or so of the Agile changes that have been approved. And you'll see here that we've kept the tie-in to the ID, and this is the ID number that you'll find on all the PowerPoint presentations as well as the spreadsheets that we've reviewed with all stakeholders over the past, 6 or 8 months. So if you open one of these items, you'll see here many of us on the vendor side will recognize JIRA as a software development tracking tool or project management tool. We'll start off with the element and then the basic summary of the change. The description will indicate more detailed information. This information will come from straight from the PowerPoint slides that we've been reviewing. And then any comments, any subsequent comments will include solutioning, development activities, all the way through kind of end-to-end to when we're ready to release this or deploy this as part of the release in the candidate release at the end of May. So are there any questions about this in particular?
So if we have a question on one of these, is there a place to do that here, or how do you want us to?
Yeah, good question, Dan. I think probably for now, because this is read-only and there's some, and I think you probably already are aware of this, but there's some kind of licensing issues, so there's no way to send feedback through this product. But we can, you can send them to me in email for now, and then what I'll do is I'll update these items with your questions so that everybody can kind of keep track. So it's kind of like JForum. It's a little bit easier for me in my opinion, it's a little bit easier to interact with, but the one limitation is it's read-only. Yeah.
Yeah, so Lisa, maybe we'll need to provide some kind of an introductory kind of on the opening page. Will the public be able to kind of track this through Kanban? Will they have a view where they can like see the items that are still in development, those that have moved into, or that under review, those that have moved into development? Will they have that Kanban look?
Yes. So for today, this is the view that everyone will have.
Okay.
By this time next week, and certainly by the time we have our next implementation call, and I'm happy to demo it further, they'll actually have a Kanban board. So that's a nice visual. Let me actually show folks on the call what that looks like. Just one second. I'll move over my screen. Okay. So can everyone see my system dashboard here?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to log in, and I'll give you a quick preview of what you'll be able to see by next week. And as you can see here, the NEMSIS TAC uses JIRA to track many of its projects. So here's NEMSIS Public. And starting next week, on the left-hand side, you're going to see a button titled Kanban Board. And if you click on that, you'll see a little bit of a more visually appealing view. So, for example, for ID1, Clay and team have already reviewed this. We've solutioned it. So the issue is that for exam 20, neurological assessment, we want to add a value that's been approved. We talked through it. The changes add value. The comment is the value will assist with the EMS Compass measures documentation, and that we're going to create this value with this code. And then because there's already an existing value and code called seizures, we'll rename that to other seizures. So once we've solutioned it at the business level, we'll move that to selected for development. And this is where it'll be assigned to likely Laurel Bader, who will be leading the IT team through these changes. And then as it's being worked on by the developer and code is being changed, it will be moved to in progress. And then finally, when this change is complete, and tested, we'll move it to done. And so in just a few weeks, what you'll see is a bunch of stuff in this first column, you'll see a bunch of stuff in this column, and then you'll start to see progress and done being populated.
And Dan brings up a good point. Maybe on the web location to click here, we could add a comment that if you have comments on any of the revisions that you could just email. Maybe we can put a hyperlink to an email there, Lisa, maybe your email or something, and maybe we can put something here too that might be helpful just to let folks know if they want to request or some kind of clarification. I could easily email you.
Sure. Yep, happy to do it. Any other questions on this topic? Do you find that it would be valuable, or can you think of other ways that we could communicate with you kind of our progress and our status on this revision?
I think might be falling behind on the updating this Kanban based on email. Probably going to be a bottleneck there.
So that's a good point, David. So Clay, at this point, when we're receiving questions or clarification on these have been approved, these changes, right? So it wouldn't necessarily be about the change going through the development process.
Right. It would be comments about the approach to development, perhaps. So, okay. Yep. And some of the requests are also more complicated, and we'll have to figure out how to work through those. I mean, for example, there's an approved request to ensure that all receive and process software can generate a state data set, and we'll check for that through compliance. So we need to come up with a process for clearly ensuring that that's present during the compliance process, and we'll try to provide some kind of documentation as to how that will happen here, and also in new documentation for the compliance process, and we'd love some feedback related to that. So we'll just try to make lots of opportunities for folks to provide us comments, but true that the items that will be moving forward here and what changes will be made are approved and decided.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions regarding the process for review? Yeah.
So it looks like you just haven't put everything in from the Agile list, right? Or do I have a filter?
No, there's no filter. This is everything. So we're just started loading this up this past week, and we'll be done probably in the next week getting everything in there. So there's about there's approximately 200 or so.
Yep.
Okay, great. Any other questions? All right, fantastic. Lisa, could you pass back?
Sure, there you go.
Presenter, thank you. Okay, fantastic. Thank you for everyone's comments and patience with us. We just really have one more item here, and it's just to reiterate a couple of discussions we had during the Deer Valley meeting. So we are preparing and almost ready to release the 2017 V3 data set. Thank you for everyone's work moving to version 3. This really is a great accomplishment. This will be our first fully V3 data set that we provide. It will include 8 million records, and so of course we need to continue to strengthen and move states to V3. Lots of progress really exponential progress has happened during 2018. So we'll have a much larger data set once we close out 2018. But this 2017 gives us a good idea of what's working and what's not with the move from version 2 to version 3. I can tell you, just to begin this conversation, that the data coming in version 3 is so much cleaner than what was coming in under version 2. And I know you kind of have to take my word for that, but we will try to provide some metrics that are specific to, for example, cardiac arrest or STEMI or other areas where we can actually show you that the quality of the data associated with key components of the data set are much, much cleaner. But I did want to perhaps just give you a quick example of kind of some of the things that we know are not working. So, and cleaning the data set, we have we can report that under the V3 structure we have 604 different procedures. Some of them are only slight differences in procedures. There's over 900 medications. There's well over 1,300 causes of injury. There's 1,700 symptoms. So those lists are extensive, and so hence our further discussion about the suggested list. Here's a 2,000-page report that really goes through all of the elements in the version 3 data set for 2017. But here's just an example of where you can see where there's different vendor systems using slightly different codings for the exact same code. For example, we have a software that's using the extension and indicating that these are all initial encounters. And then you can see, of course, that there are several versions of the same thing. So falling from a wheelchair, you can see that there's lots of codes associated with it. And so this, again, speaks to the idea that we had at the vendor meeting of just having a roll-up process where, for example, we would roll this all up to W05. And is that the best approach? So we're balancing that kind of against the idea, and I wanted to show you just an example. We're balancing that against the idea, and so these are causes of injury here you can see, and so here's the suggested lists for cause of injury. And there are times where we wanted codes past the first stem, right? So here, for example, there's lots of types of asphyxiation that are important to the public right now. For example, car asphyxiations or other ways where children get trapped and asphyxiated. If we map these all down, then we would lose the specificity of the codes. But if the roll-up only happens at the state or national level, then we could choose how deep to roll these up. That's very true. I guess the real issue that remains for us is how we would take 1,300 and find the best way to roll that up. So our charge from the Deer Valley meeting was for us to first go through all of these responses that were provided for cause of injury, for example, compare those to the codes that are present on our current suggested list. And so this list here compared to the codes that we have already thought would be of value. And then we can look to see whether we truly have captured, 98% or 95% of all the codes are really represented here, or whether we're really missing the mark with this list. I think it will help us to really be able to make some educated decisions about what we want to do in regards to suggested lists. And so that's the work that's ahead for us now that we have the 2017 data ready for analysis. So I'll stop there for just a quick question, or for just a quick moment to see if there are any questions related to what we're seeing for the suggested lists. Okay. The only other shortcoming in the data that I want to mention that we're going to have to kind of figure out how to work through is that we've also noticed in the data that we have some software products that are providing hundreds of sets of vital signs for the same patient during the same encounter. So we're going to have to kind of work through how we want to handle that. We had about 10,000 records out of the 8 million, which isn't a lot, that had more than 30 vital signs taken on a patient during an encounter. Many of those 10,000 records had like hundreds, like 300 sets of vital signs, 1 per second, for example, taken. And I'm not sure how that's happening, and we'll approach the specific vendor on that issue just to make sure that we can work through that with...
That's coming from a monitor then, most likely.
Right. A monitor maybe where they're pressing a button, for example, and getting a new set of vital signs, or some automatic system that's taking vital signs very quickly. 1 per second seems unreasonable. So we'll work through that where we saw those records come through. But we're excited. We're very, very excited to release the 2017 data. Congratulations to everyone. This is a great move forward, and we'll look forward to 2018 where we can tell already that the size of the data set will probably be tripled. So that's exciting. So any other questions about the release of the 2017 V3 data set? Okay. All right. Any other questions regarding any of the topics that we've covered, or maybe other topics that we have not addressed that you'd hoped we had time today to talk about? All right. Well, thank you very much. We always schedule this call for an hour and a half. We try, though, our best to limit it to an hour. We know how busy your schedules are. We want to ensure that we're moving quickly through the information so that we're not wasting your time. Our next call will be on September 26th. We will, however, probably repeat this call next week because of the late, our tardiness in sending out the announcement. So we'll work through that. But the next unique, different call will occur on September 26th during the same time frame. So thank you very much for joining the call today, and we'll look forward to seeing you on September 26th. Thank you.
Thanks, Clay.
Thanks.